really, it started while we were all in high school.
Oh, wow.
We all, and I say we all, um, the beginning of Thought Industry was Brent, Dustin, and myself. That is where it started. We were originally called Desecrator, and it was spelled incorrectly. And I was 16. Um, I want to say Brent was 17 and Dustin was 17 or 18. I can't remember the age differences there, but um, it kind of started almost as it was almost like a dare. I knew one of their girlfriends, and I went to school with her. They went to a different school together, and I knew the band that they had played in called Darkness, and I had been in a couple little basement bands that didn't do anything, weren't very good. Um, I was just growing as a musician way faster than people in my age group. So when I would make a band, um, they just it didn't last long because I would get very frustrated because I was just basically moving way advanced past the guys I was trying to play with. So at the time, I didn't have a band because of that. And I was talking to this guy's girlfriend, and of course I was bragging about myself because that's what you do when you're 16. And she went back to her boyfriend, and anyway, that turned into oh well, let's have this, let's almost like a dare. And so I went and met these guys. And we went and practiced, and we played a bunch of songs from Master Puppets, and Megadeth, and Slayer, and they weren't expecting that. And immediately it was just a cool vibe in the room for teenage kids playing metal covers. But right away we were like, wow, we're all on the same page, and there's not a lot of people doing this. That's wow. So this has been 1986, and so we started playing together, and that's where we started. We started playing Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax, Voivod, and Sepultura. We didn't really ever play any of that Sepultura stuff live, but that was all stuff that we liked. We played shows with Sepultura. But anyway, we're playing covers, and we just as a high school band, they got their other friend Dan to play guitar with us, and so we were a four-piece, and we started playing basement parties. And I mean, within a couple shows, we were like packing basements, and we were playing covers. You know, we were playing, like I said, Metallica and Anthrax, um, and just getting like 100 kids, and then 200 kids, and then 300 kids at a basement party, and then the parties couldn't even stay open because they get shut down by the cops because they were huge. So, and we were, we realized we can't play bars. We don't have to play bars, so we started writing songs. And that led to our first demo. We were Desecrator, first demo, and then changed it to Thought Industry. And anyway, that all happened really fast. Once we changed the name to Thought Industry, at that point, I was like 18, 19. So it was a couple years of that, growing. And by that point, we were playing all original songs, and we were pulling a few hundred people to shows. And sometimes, if they were advertised properly at that point, we could play a state theater and almost fill it with like 1,200 people in our hometown, and then a couple little towns around Michigan. And we were all about the, flotsam and jetsam, and just music that did something, that went somewhere. They weren't necessarily songs as much as it was, kind of like what Yes did, or King Crimson, where it was musical parts, and we did our best to make them fit together. And then we tried to package them like a song, And Brent was great at. He was into English, I think that's what he went to school for. He was just into language and books and things. So he he really was attracted to lyricists, Rush and things like that. He liked very creative things with words. So he just filled the slot because he was the guy. He wasn't a really singer to my knowledge before that. He was just a bass player, and so he started writing songs. And that was it, and we kind of learned on the fly, just in the room with each other. And it was cool, man. It was a cool experience. I think that a lot of bands these days, some get it, but I think a lot kind of miss that because everything is kind of cookie cutter now in a lot of ways. If there's even, a live band anymore, it's like, it's not even a live band. But for those that are, and they can do it the right way. I mean, that's an incredibly great way to grow up as a person, as a child, as a teenager growing into being a musician, is to grow with other people where you're literally learning your craft together. That really is where the magic happens. And you can't, that's what Van Halen was. There's a lot of them like that. And you can't recreate that. You only get to do that once in your life, and that kind of molds you. So we definitely all affected each other, but through the years, with record deal and putting stuff out, the relationships, they fell apart. We now looking back, we didn't like each other. It was a dare. Like they kind of they thought that they were going to get this kid who had a big mouth to come into the room and they were going to embarrass him, being me. And instead they were completely impressed, and we agreed that we needed to play together. But that's where it started. You know what I mean? That was the precipice of us getting together. And through the years, that energy kind of carried through. So there was always tension. Dustin and I would fight a lot. Brent and I a little bit. Not in the later years after Dustin was gone. Brent and I definitely didn't get along. But that was Brent, Dustin, and I did it for. We were together, I want to say 8 years, something like that. And then, I was only in the band a couple more years after we got rid of Dustin. At the time, I thought it was a good idea because I didn't get along with Dustin at all. We had some altercations while on tour where it was, the only thing keeping us from literally physically assaulting each other was the fact that we were so far from home. You know what I mean? It's like you're going to beat somebody's ass, bloody them up, hurt stuff, and then you have to play a show and sleep in a van together. So, but that's where it was at. And then Brent had issues. He was developing issues that a lot of musicians go through that were hindering Brent. Anyway. I'm skipping a lot, but I'm just kind of giving you the summary. The typical story: drugs and alcohol really ruined that band. Ultimately, that it ruined what we had when we started. Was rotten to the core. Essentially, by the time I quit, it was. There was good energy there, but the issues that come along with substance abuse, just they do get in the way. It's a thing. So it's sad because I look back and I see the impact that we had on a lot of people, and even though we had a really crappy record label, and by crappy I mean they just didn't treat us with any sort of respect, really. It was like they signed us as a favor to Jason Newsted because Jason said, hey, you should check these guys out. So because he said that, I think really that's the only reason they signed us. I really believe that. I think that we were cool, but they didn't treat us like they were interested. It's like they put us on their label, and then it was pulling teeth to get them to act like one. They were into Gore and Fate's Warning, and the sale of the Goo Goo Dolls, and a couple of the bands, and they've changed a lot since then. I mean, obviously they've grown into a, they're essentially a major label metal label, um, so that hindered us too, because we went in thinking it was going to be, the stories when you're a kid, you're like signing a record deal, you think all kinds of things, and it just didn't go that way. So it turned into a lot of work on our end, and it felt like not a lot of support from their end. So we spent a lot of money as a band just to be a band, and we didn't make any money. So it's sort of always strange to say, but it does feel like we were a little premature for the music scene in a way. You could say we were ahead of our time, but that sounds pretentious. I think it's more appropriate that we were premature, and there was a lot of stuff that came not too long after our peak, if you will. There was stuff coming out that was, I guess you could say, similar in the oddity, at least of the first two Thought Industry records. And then I do know that there's a lot of bands that I've met through the years that were fans that were inspired by it. And I'm like, wow, you're kind of a famous rich dude now, and you like my band. That's weird.
So I read an interview with former drummer Dustin Donaldson where he mentions that like Metal Blade was kind of trying to fuck y'all over as far as a Skinny Puppy tour.
They wanted to put the band Screw on the tour and kick us off.
Oh wow, man!
Yeah,
Damn.
yeah, that was true. The only thing that saved us there was the Skinny Puppy band and their management. The three band members, Rave, their producer and live sound guy, and their two managers, who I forget their names. They were great dudes. Those six people fought for us. They actually had an argument with Metal Blade on the phone. This is the story they told us. They basically kind of told Metal Blade off, our record label. They basically told them what they thought of what Metal Blade was trying to do. And so for a little bit, Metal Blade treated us different, because I think they were nervous that, I think had we been wiser, that was a breach of contract. I think at that point we could have gotten out of our contract. You know what I mean? Because that shows that they weren't working, they weren't upholding their end of the contract. They had no interest in promoting us. They were trying to take us off and put Screw on the tour. Anyway, yeah, that's a true story. Yeah, they wanted. So, and I don't. This is probably going to insult. I mean, because it's not changed in 30, 40 years. It hasn't changed. What they wanted was that cliche, totally stupid, because nobody looks any different. They wanted that band photo, the V, where the singer's in the front, and then there's like a guy flanked on each side a little bit further back, and then another guy or two flanked a little bit further behind them. You know what I mean? They wanted that. Or they wanted like the Police lineup, or you know what I mean? Those, you see them to this day. You know what I mean? From the biggest bands to the unknown bands. It's like it's the 8x10 photo. We've all seen it. They're always the same. So that's what they wanted. They didn't understand why we wanted to look different, and it's like, because it's so easy to do, because everybody looks the same. Why are you guys capitalizing the O? Because it makes you look at it and go, why is the O capitalized? You know what I mean? I remember the first thing of the artwork. Somebody said something to Dustin about Dustin and I were the ones that worked on the iconic first Thought Industry logo. He would probably say that he made the logo, but we did go back and forth on it. I'm the one that actually burnt the border around it. I burned it with a car cigarette lighter. I burned that the border that's around the original logo. That's from either my or Brent's car cigarette lighter, and I burned it. I went around and burned the edges. That's what made that. Yeah. But anyway, they had rejected didn't reject it. They just questioned why the O is capitalized. So they just didn't understand being different. They didn't understand being unique. They were, as you know, it's always been that way with metal bands. You got to have that metal logo. It's got to be pointy, and it's got to be almost hard to read, and it's got to be, you know. And it was like Dustin was great in that way, and that he we all wanted to be our own thing, and he would encourage, you know, us to be brave with it. You know what I mean? And he was right. Um, and that was one of the great things about Dustin. The same with a lot of our artwork. He was responsible for a lot of the early imagery. He would do this stuff with his girlfriend Tina at the time, and I would try to contribute a little bit because I've always been a creative person like that. But he was very defensive of it. So in a lot of ways, he kind of hijacked that part of the band, and we just kind of let him roll with it because he never had a job ever. If he did, it didn't last long. So basically, that was what kept him busy. But he did a great job. You look back, it was all very simple stuff. A lot of our imagery, to this day, you see stuff, and I'm just like, it's so easy. A lot of our imagery was simple concepts. We would take an image, put it on a photocopier, make a photocopy of it, then take that photocopy and put the photocopy in the photocopier and take another photocopy of it and basically degrade it that way a few times until you got to something that you thought looked cool. And so our flyers were that way. A lot of the stuff we did was that type of, what can we make working with what we have? And so that led to a lot of the imagery. That a lot of it was literally hours and hours spent at a place called Kinko's, which used to be a paper copy shop. Dustin and I would go there quite often and spend a ton of time doing that.
Screw, yeah, they actually started down here in my neck of the woods. So they were the band that Metal Blade tried replacing y'all with.
Yeah, it was definitely the band. That was definitely because they were basically, and I no disrespect meant, but they were basically copying Ministry. You know what I mean? That's what Screw was. So and I think Metal Blade was financially in deep to them somehow. They got a better record deal than we did. So Metal Blade had a bigger debt, and I think they were thinking that, if they put a band that sounded like Ministry opening for Skinny Puppy, that somehow they would roll the cash would roll. I don't know what they were thinking, but I think that was the thought.
So you were basically out of there by the release of the third album. Outer Space is just a martini away. Correct?
Yeah, yeah. I hope I'm not being out of bounds here, but sometimes when I talk to people about this stuff, I like to just be completely transparent. So you said you were out of there, so that made me go, out of there sounds like, yeah, I don't know. I straight up quit in the middle of the night after a show. They dropped me off at my car. So the story, we played in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And at this point, Jared was playing bass, Jared was a great bass player, but it was terrible for Thought Industry. Thought Industry was Brent's bass playing, more so than Brent's singing. Brent's lyric writing was great, but his singing, whatever. We actually got a letter from Monty Connor back in the day. He said, get a singer and call me. And we that was stupid. We should have at that point gotten a singer and called Monty Connor, because we would have been on Roadrunner, and who knows what would have happened if we had. No offense to Brent, but had we had a really good singer, and Brent could have written the lyrics, because I think Brent's lyrics were incredible. And he did turn into an amazing vocalist. But at that point, when that happened, he was not. For the first album, he was not a good singer. We were in Fort Wayne. Jared's the drummer. Jared's the drummer, and Herb was the bassist. Sorry, I said Jared was the bassist. Herb was the bassist, and Jared was the drummer. Jared was a phenomenal drummer. One of the best drummers I've ever played with. Just fucking incredible. His timing, his groove. I mean, Completely different drummer than Dustin, though. Dustin's timing was not the best. He'd speed up, he'd slow down, but his creativity was off the charts. He was incredibly creative. Just not a great timekeeper, but that doesn't always have to be a great drummer. If they do it right, which he did. He did. He was great at what he did. He was great for us. But anyway, Fort Wayne, Indiana, we played a show. Brent's years-long nagging issue was at its worst. And I just couldn't take it, because at that point it was Paul and I and Brent of the original Thought Industry, which really at that point it was just Brent and I of the original Thought Industry, and Brent was checked out. Brent had a I'm not trying to talk. Brent had an addiction issue, and he was basically just an absentee landlord. He probably didn't feel that way then. He might now. He might look back and agree with me. I don't know. But that was why I left. My heart wasn't in it anymore, because it wasn't the same band. We didn't sound like the same band. You hear what Black Umbrella sounds like.
So stumble through the snow into a downstone nativity scene. I fell asleep on baby Jesus with my boots on Joseph's back and say, got nothing left to lose.
Even compared to Martini is very different than Black Umbrella, and Martini is drastically different than the first two. I was okay with Martini, and honestly I was okay with Martini because Jared was an incredible drummer, and I loved playing with an incredible drummer like that. And Brent still had an influence over the bass parts at that point. So it still sort of had the original Thought Industry feel to it, but we were just a tighter machine. We were a little more groove oriented because it wasn't Dustin playing drums. And we were starting to turn into a songwriting band, which I was okay with, but I didn't want to get too far from, the metal of us, or the oddity of us, or the extremities. I wanted to make sure that so you can tell clearly on Martini the songs, the music that I wrote, because they are definitely the heaviest songs on the record. And then the more metal-ish, Sharon Sowers and stuff like that. They're the songs that are just more like old Thought Industry.
It ought to me throughout my head. What's your name? What's your name? I trip around in drowning crowds. What's your name? What's your name? I trip around in drowning crowds, and the air was crisp.
And the popular stuff was the stuff that was Brent. And we no longer had that unison between Christopher and Brent, which was Dustin, which would pull both of us into each other's orbit and make all songs sound more similar and weird. At this point, you had Brent writing his songs and Christopher writing his music, and then it was just getting weird. And anyway, at that point, I was not digging Herb's bass playing, because he was willing to just play, pedal the note bass lines, and not your typical Brent awesome bass lines, busy Geddy Lee style bass lines. And that bothered me. So anyway, we're at the show. I'm rambling. We were at the show in Fort Wayne, and it was terrible. We played, and there was zero passion coming from that stage. And Jared and I and Paul were super tight locked together because Paul and Jared were childhood friends. And I love playing with a good drummer, so I locked with Jared tight. And Paul and I were, we loved each other. We loved playing with each other. We'd played with each other for years at that point, so we were great. But Brent was checked out, and Herb was, he was just a filler bass player. And on the way home, Herb was driving the van, and he decided to lecture me about my commitment to the band. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? And when they dropped me off in my car, because at that point I lived in Chicago, so I would commute 3 times a week to Battle Creek, Michigan for rehearsals from Chicago. And I was living in Chicago because I was trying to get the band to move to Chicago so we could be located out of a bigger city, because I knew that would be better for us. And I was working with Filter at the time. I started working with Gino and doing Filter studio stuff. So being in Chicago was important, and I knew that it was good for Thought Industry and good for me. But anyway, that night I was like, you know what, Herb? I was like, you can't talk to me that way. I said, you know what? I said, when Brett sobers up, I said, tell him I quit. And I pulled all my stuff out. So there's the, you were out of there. So, and we were at the beginning stages of writing songs for Black Umbrella at that point. And then that kind of fucked them up, so they put out that Recruited to Do Good Deeds, which was just a dumb thing. That was kind of a way to flush out the last of the little pieces of nuggets of things that I had anything to do with. And then Black Umbrella came out. And then, to me, Black Umbrella, when I heard it, I was like, they should have changed the name of the band. And they kind of did. At that point, they started being referred to on all their artwork and everything as the Thought Industry. And that was, I think that was Brent's way of showing respect to what we used to be.
Yeah, you're right on the Recruited to Do Good Deeds for the Devil compilation. That was titled The Thought Industry Presents, actually.
Yeah, I think that's why. I never asked him, but I think that was, it just wasn't the same band at that point. It was, if you go back to the first day in the basement in high school, it was one guy. It was Brent. Paul was but obviously even that didn't stand, because eventually Paul was out of the band and Brent was the only guy.
Back to the Recruited to Do Good Deeds for the Devil compilation. It's a funny thing you say that was a dumb little whatever thing. That was actually the first thing I heard from you guys. My good friend Will was in Amsterdam, and he randomly brought back a copy, and I just ate it up for 2 years straight.
On Recruited to Do Good Deeds, the only song for me, the only song that actually was left over from when Thought Industry was Thought Industry as a 4-piece band, and it was Brent, Dustin, Christopher, and Paul, was Encounter with a Hick. And if you listen to it, you can kind of tell. It kind of has that Jane Whitfield vibe, but it also has that Boyle kind of feel, and it's also got, it's got a little bit of that. It's got a little bit of that feel from the first album too. Of the 3, my favorite by far is number 2.
Oh, for sure, man. Great shit.
We had matured. Brent got a lot better as a vocalist, and we figured out how to be what we were, which was this weird kind of progressive, technical metal band that wasn't afraid to do weird shit. And we still figured out how to do it and keep it in a somewhat song format. So I do think that the second album was the best album of the 3 that I was involved with. It just, I listen to songs like Boyle, and I'm like, God damn, that's a cool song, man.
lentils, roots, lamb, cabbage, spinach.
I hope I'm not wrecking this for you and rambling on, man. I just, you know.
Oh no, man, talk away. I've been dying to know this stuff. There's like no information, like I said. So go ahead. There's no information on the industry out there. Tell me everything you got.
Damn it, I'm gonna have to look it up. There's a book and we're in it. It's about the history of metal, and there's a thought industry chapter. It's short, but it's detailed. It's accurate. Mean Deviation. I think that's what it's called. That's the book. I think it's called Mean Deviation. I think that's the name of the book. And it's a history of like prog metal, technical metal, thrash metal, and it kind of shows how all the bands relate to each other. Anyway, there's a chapter on thought industry in there. It's cool.
I'm gonna go out on a whim here and guess that you were not part of the 2014 reunion.
No, I find that with those reunions, it's mostly everything that happened after I quit.
Yeah.
I got to be
Yeah, I
honest. I
figured.
mean, a lot of that's because nobody wants to try to play that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I know I could if I had to. I could spend a week and I could go play, Chalice Vermilion or any of those songs. But I know a lot of guys. There's a lot of those guys. There's no way they'd ever be able to play that stuff. It's just way too fast, way too technical, you know what I mean? So yeah, so that's another reason you're not going to hear those at those reunions, because it really was two different bands. I felt bad. I saw Brent. I was at Brent's first wedding, and I saw him a few times after I quit, and we had conversations, and he felt bad that I left, and that I didn't talk to him about it. But I mean, how I couldn't, you know what I mean? That's just how you can't. I hate to say this, you can't talk to a junkie. You just can't. So, and at the time, that's what he was. So, anyway, so looking back, I think if we could do it over, I bet he would say, yeah, he should have made Genius Hired Guns and just funneled all of his poppy stuff to that. And we should have kept Thought Industry as it was, a 4-piece band, weirder, heavier. That would have been, I think that would have been the smart thing to do. I think we may have seen more long-term growth rate had we done that.
I think also if you guys didn't get signed to Metal Blade, maybe things would have been different. I hear so many stories from older bands of how the label like treated them like shit.
Look how they treated us. Look at what they tried to do to us on that Skinny Puppy tour. So that right there tells you how they perceive all of their bands. So if you know what I mean? And that's why so many of their roster have disappeared and you can't hear any of the music, because really they didn't care about their bands. They might now, I would imagine, because they've done releases with Ghost. I mean, they've done some major releases. So obviously they got their business sense together. But you would think that they would go back and release every single band that they have ever had.
Yeah, for real, that would be badass.
Yeah, it would be. It would be, because there's a lot of great stuff that you can't find. Yeah. I mean, I've been playing pedal steel guitar. I think the years of fretless playing have made me realize that I should be playing a pedal steel. So yeah. So it's fun. It doesn't have to sound like country guys use it. Listen to Robert Randolph. Robert Randolph plays a pedal steel, but you wouldn't know it. And then I have another band called Snuttock, which is Snuttock. Snatuk. Um, we've been putting out music since 2003. We've got about 12 videos, four full albums, and a bunch of singles. Yeah, and that's very electronic. That does not sound like anything you would expect. It's electronic-ish. It's closer to Depeche Mode than it is Staunch Industry. So
Why can't I? Why can't I? Why can't I see through your eyes?
I mean, I've been putting out music since I left Thought Industry. It's just, the music industry was changing at that point. People weren't buying CDs anymore, and that was before all the online stuff. Napster was the only thing happening back then. We barely made it. Like I said, we barely made it into like Spotify and Apple Music and all that. It just barely got on there. You know what I mean? Like had we been, had it been a couple years later, we probably wouldn't even be there. So, it's or meaning that we would have happened a couple years earlier. You know what I mean? We were basically right on. We got lucky with that. It's possible we could have just faded into the nothing, as so many great bands have. There's tons of great bands that have just disappeared. And unless you own the album or the CD or the cassette, you can't find it.
Any other old stories or anything you can share with us?
Yeah, I got tons of them, man. I got a lot of stories that I can't tell. The first one that sticks out. So this was we were on tour with Typo Negative, and it was our second tour with Typo Negative. So we've done one, basically an East Coast tour, and it went phenomenally well. And then we did a Midwest and West Coast tour, and we were in Vancouver, and Rave from Skinny Puppy and Ken Marshall were in the venue, hanging with us, and not a single fan was in the theater. And Typo Negative, we did our sound check, and then it was time for us to play, and there was not a single person in the theater. So all four members of Typo Negative grabbed chairs, brought them all the way up to the front of the stage, sat down dead center, watched us play every single song, and applauded and screamed and hollered after every single song. And it was one of those moments where you become friends with people. I became very good friends with Peter. I was friends with all the guys. Josh is a good guy, but I became fairly close to Peter. And that was one of those moments where you realize that, I mean, they were huge at that point. That was the Bloody Kisses tour. Their album had already gone platinum. They were the headliner, and we were in Vancouver, and there's not a soul in the fucking venue. And that's just how gigs go sometimes, and that's more a fault of the promoter than it says anything about the band. But nonetheless, that's the situation we were in, and it really was awesome because you realize right then, you're like, man, these guys are no different than us. They're, they might be successful at what we're all trying to do at the moment, but they're the same. And it was a very, very cool moment. And then even better was, not only did they stay for the whole fucking set and hoop and holler, and it was like we were strippers. It's like there were four dudes sitting in front screaming at these guys on stage. And then when we got done, they didn't they acted like fans. Like they were so. It was. I'll never forget it. They acted like fans. We got done, and then they did it on purpose. They came up, and we've been seeing them for months at this point. We've been on tour with them, and all of a sudden they were just playing the role, and they were coming up, and they were like, "Man, how'd you do that? That one song when you did that thing, oh, that was so cool." And, Peter's talking to me. He's like, "Man," he goes, "you and your fretless," because he was real big into playing fretless bass all the time. And he's like, "You're fretless." He's like, "That's an incredible instrument, man." He goes, "I just can't fathom how you could play that." And he goes, and the whole time I'm like, wow, they weren't just there just to be respectful. They really fucking paid attention. They really listened. They really liked it. And then they made sure they told us after the set. And we had been with them, like I said, for months. So it was just, that's a very memorable moment that I'll never forget, because it really taught me something new. Since then, I've done that in situations. If I'm at a venue and there's nobody or very few people, I don't care if it's a band I've never heard of, or I stand dead center up front and make sure that I tell them that they're cool. And I really got that from that. So that's one story. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I could, obviously, there's a lot that I could go into, but that was a long time ago, and I guess if I could say anything, it would be, I love that you're into all that stuff that I've done. I would really ask that you pay attention to what I'm doing now, because it's the most important music to me. The Gods and Aliens stuff is the stuff that's happening right now. We've already released one album of 10 songs and 6 singles. And I play all the instruments. And then Drew does the singing, and I do, some harmony vocals. So it's basically the same setup that I've been doing for a very long time.
I have to ask, man, just a little personal question, something that has been bothering the shit out of me. I've been looking for about 10 years for a copy of the Gelatin 7-inch.
You are a lucky man, because I think you were talking to the only human in existence that has some. I will have to dig them out. They are in storage. I only have a couple. I have like maybe 3. I don't know that they have the artwork. They might just be in the actual white sleeve. I may or may not have the hand numbered. I think I have 1, which I'm keeping for myself. I might have 2, and if I have 2, I will send it to you.
Dude, Christopher, thank you so much for talking with us tonight. I know there are a lot of fans out there that are going to trip out hearing this. Keep it up, man.
And I will never, ever stop. I can't. If I were to stop making music, I'm telling you, the discontent that would build in me, the unhappiness, and the frustration and anger I would just, I would crack. Somebody'd make some stupid political statement that I just had enough of, and I pull out my pistol and shoot them. You know what I mean? Like, so I'll never stop, and I haven't stopped.